Since Lamar arrived at his grandmother's, every day seemed to be enveloped in something new, which he could not immediately realize but felt with his whole being. At first he blamed it on his fatigue from the city, on the need to finally break out of the frenzied rhythm and just relax, but every morning he caught himself thinking that he was looking forward to meeting Ida. These meetings were not planned like the first time. He accidentally noticed her near the house, on the way to the store or by the river. In her presence, the world around her seemed to lose its contours. It went into shadow, leaving only her calm figure, smooth movements, and mysterious smile. He couldn't explain why he felt so close to her, but he wasn't trying anymore. Morning came unexpectedly and, it seemed, early. The sun barely touched the trees. Its golden light glided over the grass covered with dew and penetrated through the windows into the grandmother's house. Lamar usually woke up at this hour. A little later, when the sun was rising higher, he could hear Estelle fussing in the kitchen. He tried not to disturb her, not to talk unnecessarily, but her care, the simplicity with which she cooked his favorite dishes, warmed him. However, Ida often appeared in my thoughts, her figure gliding smoothly between the trees and bushes near the neighboring plot. Every meeting with her happened by chance and seemed unexpected, but Lamar began to catch himself looking for her. At first timidly, without realizing it, he slowed down his pace, as if casually looking into her yard. Then, walking along the riverbank, he always slowed down a little, so that suddenly he would meet her there, on a winding path. She moved with such confidence and ease, as if she always knew he was there. At the moments when Lamar suddenly noticed her, everything seemed to slow down, the light acquired a special softness, and his heart began to beat a little faster. Something inexplicable, almost magical, happened to him when she was around. One day Lamar went for a walk to the river, trying not to think about whether he would meet Ida there or not. He tried to convince himself that it was just a morning desire to get some fresh air, to feel the simplicity and naturalness of life. But as soon as his gaze caught sight of her among the trees a little to the side, barely visible, with her dark eyes watching him from the shadows, he felt a wave of warmth sweep over him. Watching her move easily among the trees, Lamar suddenly realized that every day this woman was becoming something much more to him than just a friend of his grandmother. These morning walks became something of a ritual for him. Sometimes he would spend an hour, maybe two, by the river, just staring into its water, trying to figure out what exactly he liked so much here, away from the hustle and bustle. But every time he met Ida by chance, he felt his inner world changing. He did not tell her about it, tried to restrain his feelings, but in her presence something inexplicable and powerful made his heart contract. He did not try to find an explanation for this attraction, did not try to set boundaries for himself. He just enjoyed her presence, her silent steps, her calmness that seemed to extend to everything around him. More and more often he caught her gaze, barely noticeable, but full of tenderness and hidden wisdom. And at that moment, it seemed that an invisible connection was being established between them, strong and indissoluble. Lamar knew that he should not give in to this feeling, that such affection was unacceptable, but every time he looked into her eyes, these thoughts disappeared, leaving only a simple, quiet desire to be near. These moments lasted only a few seconds, but they had so much meaning and depth that Lamar felt an inexplicable sense of peace envelop him. Ida remained the same, confident and calm. Her gaze never betrayed any emotions, but he felt that she also noticed his feelings, saw how he was looking for her gaze, how he held his breath when she was near. Her presence became a kind of drug for him, which he could not get enough of. She was his shadow, the one who is always present, but never interferes, never says too much. Lamar didn't know how long he could hold back his feelings, but every day he spent with her strengthened his affection. One day, late in the evening, Lamar went out for a walk in the garden. The stars were slowly lighting up in the sky, and the silence around him filled his heart with peace. He walked along the winding path leading to the river, lost in his thoughts. At that moment he heard a slight rustle of grass and, turning, saw Ida walking towards him. She was dressed in a simple light-colored dress. Her hair fell freely over her shoulders, and the starlight was reflected in her eyes. Ida did not immediately notice him, but when her gaze fell on Lamar, something flashed in her eyes that he could not decipher. They stood silently watching each other. Lamar didn't know what to say, how to explain why he was attracted to her. At that moment he felt like he was trapped between reality and a dream. Ida was so close that he wanted to touch her hand, feel the warmth of her skin. But he restrained himself, afraid to break this thin, barely perceptible line that connected them.
It seems that we met by chance again.
Ida smiled slightly. Her face remained calm, but there was a warm spark in her eyes.
It's always quiet here in the evenings. I love this place.
Her voice was soft as velvet, and Lamar felt that voice envelop him like a cool wind touching his face. She didn't say anything special, but her words left him with a feeling of something big, inexpressible in words. They stood side by side, immersed in silence, each of them aware that something much deeper was going on between them than a simple acquaintance. Lamar knew he couldn't stay away for long, that this feeling was consuming him. He sought solace in the silence around him, but every time he looked at her, his inner conflict only intensified. He wanted to be there, to listen to her voice, to look into her eyes, but at the same time he understood that these feelings doomed him to pain and uncertainty. There was no fear in her eyes. She looked at him as if she understood his feelings, as if she knew that he was going through this, but she remained calm, as if she knew how to find balance in any situation. Every day Lamar realized that these meetings were becoming more important to him. He didn't need words, he didn't need to explain how he felt, but her presence gave him confidence that he wasn't alone. She understood him, without words, without promises, but her look said more than any phrases could say. Lamar felt that this connection was becoming a salvation for him, a light that led him through the darkness. Her silence, her light smile and calm gaze filled his soul with peace, and he began to realize that this feeling was becoming something special for him. After spending a few more minutes with her, Lamar decided to leave, realizing that if he stayed even a little longer, he would not be able to contain his feelings. He said goodbye to Ida, and her gaze stayed with him, like an invisible fire that burned in his soul. Her eyes, the calmness, her inner world became something more than just an image for him. She was the one he longed for, the one who gave him strength, but Lamar knew that this fire could be fatal for him, that his love for her carries both joy and inevitable pain. There was a strange feeling in his soul that Ida was also experiencing something similar, but she was acting as if it was just a game that did not affect her. He wanted to tell her about it, to confess his feelings, but he knew that words would only destroy this fragile silence that united them. Lamar silently continued to watch her, her quiet confidence and calm wisdom, and a feeling that he could neither name nor suppress flared up in his heart. Every morning, when he woke up, he looked for her gaze, her presence, her silent approval. She was something to him that reminded him of the serenity and wisdom of life. The next evening Lamar went for a walk again. He was drawn to the park, and he went there for a specific purpose, although he did not admit it to himself. The evening was quiet, the air was cooling from the heat of the day, and the last rays of the sun were disappearing, leaving crimson and dark streaks in the sky that would soon be covered with stars. It was the silence and peace that pulled him, and he knew that Ida might be somewhere nearby. Deep in the park, in the shade of old trees, his gaze suddenly fell on her figure. She stood by a small clearing, looking at the setting sun, and seemed far away and inaccessible. Something in her posture suggested that she was lost in thought, and Lamar paused for a moment, trying to decide whether to come closer. He felt a strange, acute excitement in her presence, but he realized that it was not just curiosity or mild interest. It was an attraction, as if something inside was forcing him to go to her, to be near her. He stood for a while, just watching her move slowly, changing her position, raising her hand to her face, as if hiding her thoughts. Steeling himself, he took a step, then another. His legs slowly led him to Ida, although an internal struggle was raging inside him. He understood that this feeling could not be explained in words, that in her presence he lost control of himself, as if he were entering another dimension where there was no time or boundaries. As Lamar approached, Ida turned to him, her eyes reflecting his own confusion, but her voice remained calm.
Are you here again?
He nodded, not knowing what to say. Her voice was as soft as the whisper of the wind, and there was something in it that made his heart beat faster. She stood in front of him, in her casual, simple outfit, and seemed as casual as ever, but he knew that there was more to it than that. Her eyes, a look full of inner light, all this awakened feelings in him that he had been trying to suppress for a long time. He tried to find the right words, to explain how he felt, but all he could do was just stand there, looking into her eyes. Every word seemed to him insufficient, incomplete. Lamar did not understand that he was attracted to her, but her presence became something for him that filled the inner void that he had carried for many years. And now that Ida was there, he knew he couldn't just leave without telling her the truth. She was much more to him than just his grandmother's friend, and this feeling consumed him completely.
I do not know why. But I want to see you every day.
The words came out of his mouth. He didn't have time to restrain himself. Ida did not look away. Her gaze remained unchanged, but in the depths of her eyes Lamar caught a spark, a barely noticeable movement, as if his words had reached her. She didn't say anything in response, but her silence was more eloquent than any answer. She walked to the nearest tree and leaned lightly on its trunk. Her movements were smooth and confident, as if she felt nothing but calm. But Lamar knew that this silence hid much more. He could feel the silence between them growing more intense, as her gaze became intense and penetrating. At that moment he realized that he could no longer hide his feelings, that he needed to explain to her everything that was going on inside him. As he took a step closer, he felt her warmth radiating from her like a light, barely perceptible fire. Lamar knew that these feelings for Ida could not be a simple infatuation, that it was not just an attraction. She was something completely new to him, a person who awakened in him all that he considered long forgotten.
Come on. I think I really like you, even more than just liking you.
Ida, hearing these words, did not change her expression. Her gaze remained as soft and calm, but her lips trembled slightly. She was standing so close that he could feel her breathing, hear her every breath. They were close, and there was something about that closeness that made him forget about everything. It seemed like the whole world had disappeared, leaving only her. Her presence filled his soul with peace, but at the same time it awakened an unbearable feeling of longing. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if weighing the words she had to say. Then her gaze settled on him again. There was a certain depth hidden behind the calmness, but Lamar couldn't figure out exactly what she was feeling. Her face remained calm, but he knew there was more to it than that.
Lamar, what you're feeling is temporary. We're here. This place makes us feel different.
Her words hit him like a cold rain. He understood that she was trying to shut him out, that for her it was just a fleeting feeling that would disappear when she returned to the city. But Lamar knew it wasn't just a hobby for him. These feelings grew every day, becoming a part of his life, and he couldn't just believe that it would pass. Her words seemed icy, but Lamar knew that he saw something else in her eyes. She wasn't telling him the whole truth, trying to protect him or herself, but her silence spoke volumes. They stood side by side, and each of them understood that it was impossible to just forget this feeling. He wanted to tell her that her words would not change anything, that he continued to feel this attraction, but Ida only nodded softly, pulling away. Lamar realized that she did not want to accept these feelings, that for her it seemed something inappropriate, wrong. Her demeanor remained restrained, but in this restraint he sensed her own doubts. He knew he couldn't make her believe what he was feeling, but this attempt to distance himself wouldn't change his attraction. When he left the park, the dark trees and the cold evening seemed even more gloomy to him. Lamar couldn't get rid of the thought that this woman had become something for him that would change him forever, that every evening, every conversation they had made him more attached. From the very morning, as soon as he woke up, Lamar felt more and more how his days at his grandmother's acquired a new, barely perceptible rhythm. He noticed how the surrounding space became more saturated, more filled with meaning, although nothing changed externally. The nature was the same. The trees were still rustling in the wind, the days were calm, but now they left him with a keen sense of expectation. A simple breakfast at the kitchen table, after which he went out into the garden. The warm light of the morning sun filling the old house, everything took on a new hue, because deep down he knew that he would soon meet her. Ida, his grandmother's friend, suddenly entered his life as if she had always been here. It was as if she walked with him along the same paths, breathed the same air, and filled the silence with a special harmony with her silent presence. Now every step he took in the garden or on the riverbank was sharpened by this inexplicable sense of her presence. Outwardly, there was no word or promise between them. Everything happened silently, as if it was a game that only they knew. He knew he shouldn't look for her eyes, but despite that, they met almost every day, and then their silence said everything. At first these meetings seemed random. He just passed by her house when she was watering the plants in the garden, or standing quietly under the shade of the trees. It was as if she happened to be on the way. Her gaze fell on him, but her expression remained calm, detached, as if it were a simple welcome meeting. But Lamar began to notice how his heart reacted to her appearance, how his breathing became ragged as soon as he saw her figure in the distance. The more time passed, the more often he felt that Ida was becoming not just a pleasant companion, but something much more than he could realize or explain. This affection filled his days even when she was far away. On walks by the river, in the woods, in the gazebo, or just at home, where he spent his evenings alone, Lamar felt her invisible presence. He was looking for her gaze, waiting for her to appear, as if it were a part of himself. At first he tried to fight this feeling. It seemed to him that this was temporary, that his grandmother's friend was just a fleeting image, reminding him of the quiet life he had once left. But with each passing day, this idea became more and more untenable. He was attracted to her, and Lamar could no longer pretend not to notice it. She was there, and he found her everywhere, in every detail of their little world, in the sound of her footsteps, in the muffled laughter that came from her garden, and in her light gaze that followed him, as if casually. They bumped into each other more and more often on the tracks, as if by accident. When they met, there was a silence between them, filled with something more than words. Lamar found comfort in these looks, a strange calmness and anxiety at the same time. Ida, with her smooth gait, always kept a little distance, but it was this distance that gave his feelings a new, painful shade. She was there, but she never let herself cross the line. Her smile, calm, even voice and soft gaze created an aura of inaccessibility around her, and this only strengthened his feelings. When they met again by the river, where their favorite trail was, Lamar felt something change in his soul. Ida stood on the opposite bank, motionlessly watching the water flow. He did not dare to approach, but her presence attracted, filled the entire space around him. Lamar stood watching her figure, watching her every move, as if he was afraid that this moment would disappear as soon as he took a step. But she remained, as if nature itself had detained her in this place. And Lamar knew that these feelings had become a part of his life, that without them he could no longer imagine his existence here. Over time, their meetings began to occur more often, but they still did not talk to each other about what connects them. They were silent. Their silence became that invisible thread that connected them into a single whole. Sometimes Lamar noticed her in the garden among the flowers, where she was quietly going about her business, as if his presence did not matter to her. But every time she looked up at him, her gaze was full of something deep and inexplicable, and Lamar realized that this connection was stronger than they could admit. There were moments when it was as if a fire was burning between them, and neither of them dared to succumb to it. Her presence became like air to him, necessary but unattainable. Every evening when they met by chance in the park, on the paths or by the shore, he knew that these meetings gave his life a new meaning. In her presence he became himself, free from his worries and the past. He began to feel like a different person, ready to meet the feelings that seemed so simple and honest. But at the same time he understood that there was something irresistible between them, something that kept them on edge. Each of their meetings was filled with tension, and they both knew about it, but they were silent, as if they did not want to break this fragile harmony. Ida remained as calm and confident, her face reflected only a slight smile, but her every look, her every pause said more than words could express. It was as if she knew what was going on between them, but she maintained the same restraint, leaving him in agonizing suspense. Lamar searched for her in every moment of his days, in every morning wake-up and evening walk. He realized that this connection had become something so deep for him that he could no longer imagine himself without these meetings, without her presence, her calm gaze and quiet steps along the paths. Her image haunted him, filling his thoughts and his every breath, and he could no longer fight this feeling. Now every day was filled with expectation for him when he would see her again, even for a moment, even from afar. As the days passed, he knew that this attraction was becoming more and more unbearable. It was burning in his soul like a fire that could not be extinguished. Her image became for him not only a source of joy, but also a painful expectation, which intensified every day. He realized that this feeling was not just sympathy or attraction, it was something more. It was a part of himself. And he knew that he could no longer resist it, that every time they met, he was getting closer to the moment when he would have to admit that this woman had become something for him that changed his heart forever. Now every morning, every sunset, every evening brought him only one thing: the desire to see her again, to feel her presence, to enjoy her every movement, every look. Her light gait, soft gestures, her smile became for him what he woke up for, what filled his life with meaning. Every day their meetings left a deeper mark on Lamar's soul, but a painful feeling of mystery and secrecy began to weigh on him. In his eyes, Ida had long ceased to be just a friend of his grandmother. She had become a person to whom he was attracted with inexplicable force, and now he could no longer hide his feelings from himself. These feelings were quiet at first, like a light evening breeze, but now they resembled a storm raging inside, which demanded an exit. She became a meaning for him, a necessary part of his life in this place, although everything around remained the same, filled with tranquility and silence. But every time he returned to the house, he felt that he was bringing with him something inexpressible, in words a storm of emotions, mixed with the painful realization that these feelings might remain only a secret. As time passed, their meetings became more frequent. At first it was random intersections, a light exchange of glances, a fleeting smile, every moment, as if randomly interrupting the monotony of the day. But now Lamar found himself looking for her every day, memorizing every detail, every gesture and look, as if every moment with her could be the last. Their silence took on a new meaning. It became an unchanging part of what had arisen between them, like an unspoken understanding, deep and personal. But it was in this silence that the tension grew, which became more and more unbearable. He didn't know how much longer he could hold back, but he was also afraid of the consequences of confessing. Lamar was completely at the mercy of his feelings, and every time he met Ida's gaze, this feeling grew, filled with a special meaning. Her figure flashing among the trees, her quiet gait and weightless presence became something akin to magic for him. But he understood that hidden attraction brings pain with it. Lamar wished he could just enjoy her presence, but his heart was already demanding more. And at these moments the silence of the house, filled with the rustle of Grandma's footsteps and the sound of her voice, became frighteningly loud for him. He could not look his grandmother in the eye, feeling that he was betraying her trust and her care. Lamar knew that Ida was a person whom Estelle had long accepted into her life and into her heart, and this person had become someone incredibly important to him. But every time he thought about it, he was overcome by a strange feeling of guilt. He knew that for his grandmother, Ida was more than just a friend. She was a companion in life, a person who supported her when many had already left. And the realization that he had fallen in love with her seemed somehow unacceptable. His connection with Ida became something hidden, a mysterious ritual that filled his every day, but with it came a shadow of fear. He knew that one day his grandmother might realize that something much stronger than simple sympathy had arisen between him and her friend. There was a growing feeling in Lamar's heart that he was betraying not only his grandmother, but also himself, allowing these feelings to grow in the shadows. But he couldn't stop himself. Every time they met, their silence turned into the moment he lived for. One evening, when his grandmother asked him to help with the garden, he felt that his looks began to betray him. His heart was beating too fast, and every step he took, every glance towards his grandmother's house, was filled with guilt. Estelle's words pierced him like a reminder that Ida was not just someone random in their lives. She was part of his grandmother's story, and Lamar began to fear that his feelings could destroy everything that had been built over the years. He felt like he was between two fires: on the one hand, his love; on the other, his duty to his grandmother, her trust and her calmness. He was torn apart, feeling himself sinking more and more into the painful realization that every meeting with Ada was a step towards one day confessing everything to his grandmother. These thoughts began to poison his joy at meeting Ida. He was afraid that their connection, which they had so carefully concealed, would become obvious, that every moment they shared would be revealed. Lamar saw in Ida the strength and calmness that he had admired more than once, and he understood that she, too, was probably aware of the danger of their relationship. Their every look, every touch, although filled with tenderness, became painful from the realization of what they were doing. He understood that he would not be able to deceive his grandmother for a long time, that their feelings would come out one day, and he would have nowhere to hide. Every day Lamar noticed more and more that Ida, although responding to his feelings, was being careful. It was as if she was afraid that their connection would become obvious, and they would both be forced to admit that there was more between them than just friendship. Her gaze was full of restraint, her smile became less open, and her hands, which had previously touched him lightly in greeting, now barely noticeably lingered, as if she was trying to restrain herself from giving vent to her feelings. And the more he saw that hidden fear in her eyes, the more attracted he became to her. He wanted to break down this barrier, but he understood that her restraint was the last limit that protected them both from final recognition. Lamar realized that every day, every look and every gesture was a step towards the inevitable. They could no longer just be friends. They could not ignore the fact that their bond had become too strong, too deep a feeling that they both tried to hide, but which could not be suppressed. It was a love that couldn't be called out loud, that had to be hidden, and that made it all the more painful. But with each new meeting, he realized that he could no longer stay in the shadows. He needed to confess everything, to tell his grandmother the truth, even if it hurt, even if it destroyed the world they had all so carefully guarded. With each passing day, thoughts of recognition filled Lamar's head more and more, filling his every step with a sense of inevitability. The space of the house and garden, which had once seemed serene and safe to him, now seemed to hang over him like a mute but tangible barrier. He found himself starting to avoid talking to his grandmother, spending more and more time alone, where he allowed himself to immerse himself in his thoughts and conflicting feelings. His grandmother's looks, her calm kindness, seemed unbearable to him now. He could not look into her eyes, knowing that he was hiding something from her that for him had become the meaning of his days here. At first he tried to find an excuse for his feelings. He told himself that it was just an impulse caused by the silence of this place, the simplicity of their meetings with Ada. He tried to explain to himself that this impulse would pass, but every time he saw her, every new meeting, every intersection of their views destroyed this confidence. Ada became like a magnet for him, which attracted him not only by her appearance or calmness. She became something that filled his heart, which revived him again, but at the same time tormented him. Ida was like a forbidden fruit for him, which became more and more desirable every day. Her movements, her quiet smile, her manner of behaving with restraint but confidence, all this captivated him. He had seen her in the garden in the morning, tending the flowers. He had found traces of her in every detail of this house, and now every day without her seemed lost to him. But most of all, Lamar suffered from the fact that every moment with Ada was associated with guilt for him. Guilt in front of his grandmother became his constant companion. It burned him from the inside and tore his heart. He knew that Grandma cherished Ida not just as a friend. Ida became a part of their family, a part of her memories, the only one who stayed by their side when many had already left. Lamar was aware that their friendship was riddled with years of history, the memory of their experiences and the trust that cannot be broken. But no matter how hard he tried to pull away, to forget about his feelings, he still found himself thinking about her every day. Ida filled his thoughts, his dreams, and he couldn't just forget about it anymore. Every morning when he got up, he thought about how he would tell his grandmother the truth. He imagined her reaction, the severity she would have to face if he told her everything. He was afraid to think that she might not understand him, might see in him a traitor who had destroyed her world. But he could no longer hide the truth. His feelings were too strong, they overwhelmed him, and every day this silence became more and more unbearable for him. Lamar increasingly noticed how his grandmother looked at him, how her gaze lingered a little longer than usual, as if she understood that something was happening but could not figure out what exactly. He felt that she needed this explanation, that she was ready to hear the truth herself. But every time he tried to speak, the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't say it out loud, couldn't break the fragile calm that still lingered in their house. Meetings with Ida have become something special. They both knew that something was going on between them, but neither he nor she could put it into words. Their looks said more than their mouths could say. Ida saw his struggle, saw his torment, and seemed to understand how he felt. Her silence was a support for him, but also a reminder that this feeling cannot be called, that it must remain hidden. One evening, when they happened to be alone in the garden, Lamar felt that he could no longer contain his emotions. He looked at her. Her face was illuminated by the soft light of the moon. Her eyes looked at him calmly, but he felt that this calmness hid the same pain that he himself was experiencing. At that moment he realized that he could no longer hide the truth, that he needed to confess, tell everything, even if it hurt. The next day he began to prepare for a conversation with his grandmother. He spent the day alone, trying to find the right words that wouldn't hurt her, that would explain what he couldn't even explain to himself. He tried to imagine her reaction, her expression when she found out the truth. He knew that his grandmother would not be able to accept his feelings easily, that Ida was something sacred to her, that her friendship with her was a part of her life, a part of her past. Lamar felt that this conversation would be the most difficult for him in his life. He was thinking about how to talk about his feelings, how to explain that they were not something temporary, that it was not a fleeting attraction. He understood that his confession could change everything they had, that it could destroy their relationship. But the silence became unbearable, and he knew that he could no longer live in the shadows. In the evening, when Grandma was busy with dinner, he realized that the time had come. He gathered his thoughts, his heart was pounding, and he felt a chill running down his back. He sat down at the table and waited for his grandmother to finish her business, feeling that every minute of waiting was becoming torture. Lamar knew that this conversation would be a point of no return for him, and he could not predict what its outcome would be. When Grandma sat down next to him, her face was as calm as ever, but in her eyes he saw something that reminded him of her wisdom, her patience and the love she always gave him. He knew that her answer would determine his future, that he would no longer be able to hide the truth and live the way he used to. When Lamar finally decided to talk to his grandmother, fear and determination were bubbling in his soul. It was as if he was moving through a thick fog, realizing that this evening would be a turning point for his life, Perhaps it would bring something final that could not be changed. His heart was beating so loudly that it seemed even the walls of the old house could catch its beats. He tried to collect his thoughts, to remember all the words he had memorized in the silence of the last few days, but now they were mixed up, leaving only a sense of the great importance of the upcoming conversation. Lamar did not know if he would be able to fully convey to her the whole truth that he was hiding, but he was ready to risk everything to free himself from the weight that threatened to engulf him. The evening was calm, as it always is in this house, but today the atmosphere felt different. Tension was in the air, making even the most familiar things seem alien. Grandma was sitting at the table, her face focused but calm. She looked at him, and there was so much understanding in that look that Lamar felt very small for a moment. He could almost see in her eyes the echoes of his entire past, when she was his support, mentor, and closest person, and this thought caused him a sharp sense of pain. He knew that his every thought, every emotion was obvious to her, as if she understood him more deeply than he did. His words began to come out with difficulty. He felt his throat constrict with excitement. Lamar began to speak, choosing his words carefully, but his every sentence sounded like a distant echo. He tried to explain to his grandmother that his feelings for Ida had become something more than just sympathy. He said that this woman had taken an important place in his heart, that she was the one who helped him find himself anew. Lamar did not look at his grandmother, fearing to see disappointment in her eyes, but in her silence he sensed something that told him that she already knew what he was talking about. With each word, Lamar felt his heart getting lighter, but the pain did not go away. He understood that his grandmother might be disappointed, that she might never forgive him for this confession. And yet he continued, knowing that he could not hide this feeling. He told her how every day spent with Ida filled him with new meaning, how their silent meetings became a source of inspiration and peace for him. He confessed that he could no longer live with this burden, that this feeling could not remain hidden, and he had to open it up to her. Grandma continued to listen without interrupting, and in this silence he felt her understanding. She expressed neither surprise nor condemnation. Her gaze remained as calm as ever, but Lamar could see that there was an inexpressible sadness hiding in her eyes. He knew he was hurting her, that his revelation was breaking the bond they had been building for years. But he also saw that his grandmother understood him, that her love for him was still alive, despite everything. When Lamar finished, his voice trailed off, and silence fell in the room. It seemed like an eternity before his grandmother spoke. But instead of words, she just took his hand. Her gesture was simple, but filled with endless meaning. Lamar felt in her touch all the tenderness that she had kept for him all these years, all the acceptance that he was so afraid of losing. Her hand was warm, but in her eyes he saw a strange, painful expression that he could not decipher. He realized that his confession was a heavy blow to her, but in this silent gesture he felt her boundless acceptance and love. She looked at him for a long time. Her gaze was sad, but Lamar saw that there was no condemnation in her eyes. She seemed to forgive him, realizing that his love for Ida was more than just a feeling. There was the wisdom of a man who had lived a long life and seen a lot in her eyes, and Lamar realized that she accepted him no matter what. He couldn't believe that she could let him go so easily, accept so easily what was tearing him apart. But Grandma just nodded, her eyes glistening with tears that she was trying to hide, and Lamar realized that her tacit agreement was all he needed. Grandma got up. Her steps were slow, as if she was carrying the brunt of this conversation. Her face remained calm, but Lamar saw her shoulders slump slightly, as if his words had taken away some of her vitality. He knew he had hurt her, but he understood that she accepted him for who he was, with his feelings and his choices. Her love was what gave him strength, and he knew that her understanding was all he needed to carry on. When she left the room, leaving him alone, Lamar felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He knew that their relationship would no longer be the same as before, that their bond was now filled with something new and unexplored. But he also realized that their love had deepened, that her forgiveness had freed him from all doubt and fear.